The day my trunk became a crime scene. There's something about living in an HOA neighborhood that feels a bit like living under a microscope. Every little thing you do, from the color of your mailbox to how many inches your grass grows before mowing, is someone's business. But most people at least try to keep the curtain twitching to a minimum. Except for her, my own personal neighborhood tyrant, Karen Whittaker, the self-appointed guardian of all things pure, proper, and painfully boring. The woman had binoculars in her sunroom, a notepad by her window, and a pathological need to sniff out evil in even the most innocent of situations. I'd lived in my house for almost 4 years, and I'd lost count of how many times I'd seen her peeking over my fence or casually walking by with her phone out, recording whatever she deemed suspicious. Most days, I ignored it. You get used to it after a while. The constant low hum of meddling. But nothing could have prepared me for the day she decided I was a cold-blooded killer. It all started with a completely normal trip to the mall. Halloween was around the corner, and after a few years of low-effort costumes, I'd gone all out this time. I'm talking hyper-realistic, movie-quality zombie costume. Shredded clothes, torn flesh prosthetics, and blood splattered like I'd just crawled out of a grave. The costume store clerk actually gave me a thumbs up when I tried on the mask, which was so grotesquely lifelike it made a toddler cry in the next aisle. That's how you know it's good. After grabbing some groceries and stopping for an overpriced coffee, I headed home, tossed the bags and costume into my trunk, and parked in my driveway. No rush. I sat there for a bit, scrolling through memes, answering texts, just unwinding from the day. That's when I felt it, the distinct, spine-crawling sensation of being watched. I glanced up and yep, there she was. Karen, standing like a statue on the sidewalk, arms folded so tightly I thought she might snap in half. Her squinty eyes locked on me like she was solving a crime in real time, piecing together clues that only existed in her imagination. Now, Karen's staring wasn't new. What was new was the way she was really staring this time, like her mind was sprinting down a conspiracy rabbit hole at breakneck speed. Normally, she'd huff and puff, maybe snap a picture, and storm off to write an angry post on the neighborhood Facebook page. But today was different. She wasn't just watching, she was calculating. I gave her a half-hearted wave, hoping she'd get the hint and move along. But she didn't budge. Instead, she whipped out her phone, snapped at least 6 photos, and then, like a woman possessed, took off running. I mean running. Not the brisk power walk to the mailbox kind of running. I'm talking full-speed sprint, hair flapping, foam clutched like it was a detonator. She disappeared into her house, slamming the door so hard I actually jumped in my seat. Weird, even for Karen. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe she'd caught sight of a stray cat she didn't approve of or some kid riding a bike without a helmet, her usual targets. I grabbed my grocery bags, locked the car, and was halfway to my front door when I heard the first distant wail of a siren. Now, I live in a quiet neighborhood. Sirens are rare. 3, practically unheard of. But sure enough, 3 police cruisers came flying down my street like they were responding to a hostage situation. They screeched to a halt in front of my house, tires kicking up little clouds of dust, red and blue lights spinning in chaotic spirals. I froze. I mean, what else do you do when the cavalry arrives at your doorstep for no apparent reason? Before I could even process it, uniformed officers poured out of the vehicles, hands hovering near their holsters, eyes scanning my property like they expected bodies to be stacked like firewood. A tall, broad-shouldered officer, clearly the one in charge, approached, his face grim, his stance firm. "Sir," he said, in that clipped tone you only hear in cop shows, "we received a report of a possible homicide on this property." I actually snorted, not out of disrespect, but out of sheer disbelief. "A what?" "Homicide," he repeated, as if saying it slower would help it make sense. I opened my mouth, but words failed me. What the hell was he talking about? I hadn't so much as squashed a spider that day. That's when the front door across the street burst open, and out strutted Karen, phone aloft like the Statue of Liberty's torch, triumphant smirk plastered across her face. "I saw it all," she screeched. "He stuffed a body into his trunk." The officers' heads all turned to me in unison. Their hands really drifted toward their weapons now. "Body," I repeated, dumbfounded. "What body?" Karen jabbed her finger at my car. "Go ahead. Look, there's blood." My stomach sank, and then almost immediately, I realized what had happened. "Oh, for the love off." "Ma'am," the lead officer said, holding up a hand to calm her. "We'll check." "Please do," I said, raising my hands in the universal sign of I'm too tired for this nonsense. They moved in like a tactical squad, approaching my car as though they expected the trunk to pop open and spit out a zombie, which, in a way, wasn't far off. The officer nearest to the car popped the trunk. There was a beat of silence, the kind of silence that feels stretched thin, like the world is holding its breath. Then came the laugh. It was short, almost a bark, stifled behind a gloved hand. Another officer leaned in, and I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. The lead officer let out a long, suffering sigh. There in the trunk was my zombie costume, shredded, blood-drenched, folded neatly next to my grocery bags. The mask stared up at them with its grotesque, contorted grin. Fake blood pooled underneath it from the busted prop wound on the chest. Karen's smug expression crumbled like stale bread. "That's it," she shouted. "That's the body." "Ma'am," the lead officer said, visibly restraining himself from unleashing a string of expletives. "This is a Halloween costume." But there's blood," she stammered, her fingers shaking. "Fake blood," the officer replied. "You can buy it at any store." Karen's face turned a shade somewhere between overripe tomato and fire engine red. "You're just going to let him get away with it. He's always acting suspicious, coming home late, walking around with packages." I couldn't help myself. "That's called living, Karen." The lead officer turned to me, looking as though he, too, wanted nothing more than to go home and rethink his life choices. "Sir, we apologize for the inconvenience." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As the officers began packing up, Karen stood there, vibrating with fury. "This isn't over," she shrieked. "He could be hiding something inside the house." "Ma'am," the officer said sharply, "we're done here." For a moment, she looked like she was going to explode. But the eyes of the gathered neighbors, many of whom had stepped onto their lawns to watch the unfolding chaos, bored into her, and some part of her finally realized she'd gone too far. The cruisers pulled away. The crowd dispersed, and Karen slunk back into her house, defeated but not broken. Not yet, because in HOA hell, a Karen never truly surrenders. And this was only the beginning. When Karen declares war, the day after the trunk incident, you would think Karen might have learned her lesson. After all, when you summon the cavalry and the only thing they find is a Halloween costume, you'd expect some level of embarrassment, maybe even the brief flicker of self-awareness. But not Karen. No, she was just getting started. I woke up the next morning feeling cautiously optimistic. The police had left without arresting me. I hadn't been hauled off for questioning, and my neighbors had gotten front row seats to Karen's public humiliation. If anything, it felt like a win. A rare moment where the universe actually sided with me. I should have known better. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when I noticed the clipboard. It was resting on my porch railing, tucked neatly under a large rock like a demented love letter from Satan. A bright orange sticky note fluttered on top. In large, angry letters, it read, "Community Standards Violation. Action required." I hadn't even done anything yet today, but here we were. I picked it up, flipping through the form, and realized this wasn't an official HOA violation slip, the kind printed in bland fonts with vaguely threatening language. No, this was homemade, straight from the fevered mind of Karen Whittaker herself. The violations were handwritten in scratchy, furious penmanship. Suspicious activities, excessive loitering in own driveway, improper storage, possible biohazard material, blood-stained items, visible to public, potential criminal conduct, use of disguises to avoid identification. I actually spit my coffee out laughing. Disguises, biohazards? It sounded like I was running a meth lab out of my garage instead of just buying a Halloween costume. There was a second page, a petition. A petition. Karen had gone door to door at sunrise, gathering signatures from neighbors to review the safety risk posed by Mr. Andrew Marshall. That was me, Mr. Safety Risk. The best part, only 2 signatures were on it, hers and her husband's, Rick. I hadn't even seen Rick in months, mostly because he worked nights and slept during the day. But apparently, he had been dragged into her crusade against my very existence. I set the clipboard down, debating whether to frame it or burn it, and was about to head inside when I heard the unmistakable shuffle-stomp-shuffle of Karen's orthopedic sneakers coming up my walkway. "Good morning, Andrew." Her voice was fake sweet, the kind of tone someone uses when they're either about to sell you something or accuse you of arson. I turned slowly, plastering on my best fake smile. "Morning, Karen." She clasped her hands together like a kindergarten teacher about to explain sharing to a room full of toddlers. "I see you received the petition. It's just a formality, of course, but we have to take community safety very seriously after, well, you know." "After what?" I wanted to ask. "After you call the cops on a pile of rubber and fabric." But I bit my tongue. "Appreciate your concern," I said instead. "But I think the police made it pretty clear everything's fine." Her smile flickered, just for a moment, before snapping back into place. Of course, but you understand, there's a process." The thing about Karen was, her sense of authority wasn't real. The HOA had officers, a president, a treasurer, a whole board. Karen, despite what she wanted the world to believe, was not one of them. But that had never stopped her before. Rules were just suggestions, as far as she was concerned. "I'm happy to address any concerns directly with the HOA," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "You know, the actual HOA." Her eye twitched. "The committee values input from residents." "You're not on the committee, Karen." She bristled. Her whole body stiffened like a bird puffing out its feathers. "I'm a concerned stakeholder." I couldn't help myself. "You're concerned, all right." Her smile cracked clean in half. "We'll see how funny you think this is when the community review hearing happens." She pivoted sharply, nearly tripping over her own feet, and stormed back across the street. I could see her muttering to herself, already plotting whatever came next. Community review hearing. That was a new one. Karen wasn't just escalating. She was innovating. The surveillance state of suburbia. By lunchtime, it was clear that Karen had decided my every move was evidence. Every time I stepped outside, to grab my mail, water the plants, even just to stretch, her blinds would twitch. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of her phone lens poking out, recording me like I was some rare species of suburban wildlife. By 3 p.m., her paranoia had mutated into propaganda. A printed flyer appeared on the neighborhood Facebook page. A community alert. It featured a grainy, zoomed-in photo of me in my driveway, mid-yawn, underlined with, "Beware, strange behavior, SPOTED 8318 Maple Drive." That was my address. The flyer listed unusual hours of activity, unknown packages delivered, possible hidden spaces in garage, potential illegal activities. The kicker was the footer, in bold, Comic Sans font. "If you see so me thing, say so me ting." I'm not proud of what I did next, but sometimes pettiness is the only language people like Karen understand. I created my own flyer. Same format, same Comic Sans, but this one featured a close-up of Karen peeking through her blinds, face twisted into a paranoid scowl, with the caption, "Neighborhood Watch" or "Neighborhood Menace." Underneath, I listed, "Excessive surveillance of neighbors, unauthorized distribution of personal photos, multiple false police reports, general menace to public peace." I printed 50 copies and, under the cover of early evening, tucked one into every mailbox on the street. The breaking point. The explosion came at exactly 7:45 p.m. I was in my living room, enjoying a hard-earned beer, when I heard the unmistakable screech of Karen's voice from outside. "Andrew Marshall, you coming out here right now?" I sighed, took my time, and opened the door to find her standing in the middle of the street, holding one of my flyers in a trembling hand. Her face was somewhere between furious and on the verge of tears. "Karen," I said mildly, "what's the problem?" "This." She shook the paper so violently it ripped. "This is libel." "Actually," I said, "it's not. It's all true," and I was very careful with my wording. "But I appreciate your feedback." She actually stomped her foot. "You can't do this. I'm going to the HOA. I'm going to the police." "Again?" Her face flushed deep red. "This isn't funny." "It's a little funny," I said. For a moment, I thought she might actually faint from sheer rage. Her whole body vibrated like an overwound clock. Then, with a dramatic flourish, she pointed one trembling finger at me. "This is war, Andrew." She turned on her heel and marched back to her house, slamming her door so hard a piece of her Halloween wreath fell off. A declaration of petty war. The next morning, my trash can was mysteriously cited for being improperly positioned, off by maybe 2 inches. Karen's doing, no doubt. That afternoon, a complaint was filed with the HOA alleging that my front lawn gnome was offensive and potentially satanic. The gnome, for the record, was a basic garden statue holding a watering can. By nightfall, an anonymous post appeared on the neighborhood page. "Should we be concerned about dangerous individuals living among us?" It was signed, of course, "A Concerned Neighbor." Karen's fingerprints were all over it. She had declared war, and I wasn't about to back down. Operation Suburbia Meltdown. There's a point in every ridiculous feud where logic takes its bags, walks out the door, and never looks back. It's the tipping point, the moment where 2 people could have chosen peace but instead grabbed the flamethrowers. That point came at 9:07 a.m. on a Thursday when I discovered my lawn had been chalked off like a crime scene. No exaggeration. There was actual yellow chalk outlining the edges of my grass, forming a wonky rectangle that bled over onto the sidewalk. In the center of the lawn stood a metal stake with a laminated sign that read, "Property line violation under review. Pending investigation." Investigation by who? The Ghostbusters. There was no HOA logo, no official paperwork, just Karen's telltale Comic Sans font and her overuse of unnecessary capitalization. She was creating an imaginary land dispute right there on my front lawn. I stood in my slippers, coffee in hand, wondering if I should just start drinking something stronger before noon. "Morning, Andrew." Her voice snapped me out of my stupor. I turned to see Karen perched at the edge of her driveway, dressed in what I could only describe as suburban SWAT gear, khaki capris, a tactical fanny pack, and a bright orange reflective vest, as if she were directing traffic at a children's parade. In her hand, she clutched a clipboard, the universal weapon of every HOA tyrant. "Morning, Karen," I said, carefully neutral. "I see you've noticed the preliminary demarcation," she chirped, waving at the chalk outline like she was unveiling a new community garden. "Demarcation for what?" "For the property line adjustment and compliance verification process," she announced, like that was a real thing that existed. "We've had concerns about encroachment." I stared at her. "Encroachment?" "Yes," she said, nodding so vigorously her fanny pack jiggled. "I measured your lawn." "With what?" She held up a pink retractable tape measure with cartoon kittens printed on the side. "Precision tools." I ran my hand down my face. Karen, there's literally a property survey on file with the county. My lawn isn't violating anything." She smiled, that tight-lipped, passive-aggressive smile that made me want to scream into a pillow. "Well, we'll see." Before I could argue, she retreated to her porch, where she had set up what I could only describe as a mobile command center. A folding table covered in binders, a walkie-talkie, and a pair of binoculars that would make the CIA jealous. She even had a lawn chair, perfectly positioned to face my house, with a notebook labeled "Suspicious Activity" balanced on her knee. This was no longer passive-aggressive. This was aggressive-aggressive. The spy games begin. At first, I tried to ignore her. I went about my day, but no matter what I did, water my plants, take out the trash, wash my car, her binoculars followed me like a hawk tracking a particularly shady mouse. By day 2, she had started timing me. Every time I left the house, I'd hear the loud beep of a stopwatch. The first time I went to the mailbox, I was apparently loitering suspiciously for 1 minute and 47 seconds. By the third time, she was recording my walking speed. At 3:15 p.m., a new laminated sign appeared on her lawn. Note I see. Suspicious patterns observed. Subject under active monitoring. The subject, of course, was me. Now, I could have reported her to the real HOA, but there was a problem. The HOA president, Mrs. Delgado, was best friends with Karen. They were part of the same weekly book club, which, from what I gathered, mostly involved gossiping and wine-drunk debates about which neighbors' holiday decorations were tacky. Going through official channels was useless. I needed a different approach. Operation Lawn Art. If Karen wanted to play spy, I could play artist. At 6:00 a.m. the next morning, I crept onto my lawn with a plan. Using a bag of bright pink plastic flamingos, I arranged them into a giant arrow pointing directly at Karen's house. Beneath the arrow, I staked a sign that read, "Neighborhood Watch Headquarters. Surveillance in progress." When she stepped outside at 7:00 a.m. for her daily patrol, her face turned a shade of purple I hadn't seen outside of a cartoon. She marched over, clipboard swinging dangerously. "Andrew, what is this?" I sipped my coffee, just making sure the neighbors know where the watchdog lives. "You can't do this," she shrieked, jabbing her finger at the flamingos. "This is defamation. It's directional signage," I said innocently. "You love signs." She stormed back inside, slamming her door so hard a decorative wreath fell off and rolled down the driveway. It was only 7:15 a.m., and my day was already perfect. The petty Olympics escalate. By day 4, it was full-on psychological warfare. Karen installed a security camera pointed directly at my front door. In retaliation, I mounted a Halloween decoration, a life-sized Grim Reaper holding a sign that said, "Hi Karen," in my front yard. Karen upped the ante by sending me anonymous letters, in her unmistakable handwriting, citing fake violations like suspiciously rapid lawn mowing, unlicensed barbecue usage, excessive smiling while retrieving packages. In response, I printed satirical neighborhood newsletters and slid them into every mailbox on the street. Headlines included, "Neighborhood Watch President Declares War on Lawn Gnomes." Karen, defender of the sidewalk, keeper of the binoculars. Karen started pacing her driveway at night, walkie-talkie clutched to her chest, muttering into it like she was coordinating a SWAT raid. The only person on the other end was her husband, Rick, who mostly grunted responses from his recliner. The neighborhood, of course, ate it up. People started sitting on their porches, wine glasses in hand, watching the feud unfold like it was a live-action soap opera. Some even brought popcorn. I caught Mrs. Paddle from 2 houses down live-streaming our standoff to her Facebook page with the caption, "HOA Hunger Games. Place your bets." The breaking point. The final straw came when I received a formal, hand-delivered letter from Karen herself, printed on pink stationery decorated with pictures of cats in police uniforms. "No toad I see, of if I in ale bo earning." Dear Mr. Marshall, it has come to the attention of the Neighborhood Safety and Compliance Authority, HOA Karen, that your continued disrespect for community standards poses an ongoing threat to property values, public morale, and the delicate social fabric of Maple Drive. Effective immediately, you are hereby ordered to cease all flamingo-related signage, refrain from suspicious lawn movements, submit to a voluntary inspection of your premises to be conducted by the undersigned, Karen. Failure to comply will result in further escalation. Signed, Karen Whittaker, self-appointed safety chairwoman, Neighborhood Watch Supreme Commander. I couldn't stop laughing. The level of delusion was impressive. But then I noticed a P.S. at the bottom. P.S. I have already contacted the HOA about initiating formal proceedings against you. Expect a hearing. Hearing. There it was again. The community review hearing, Karen's holy grail. It was official. We were heading for the nuclear option, a neighborhood tribunal where Karen would present her evidence and attempt to have me declared a resident of concern. She wanted to put me on trial. For what? Owning a lawn and living my life. Fine. If Karen wanted a showdown, I'd give her a show. The trial of the century, according to Karen. I knew the moment had arrived when a thick manila envelope appeared in my mailbox, sealed with enough packing tape to survive a hurricane. The return address was just 2 words: Neighborhood Watch. Inside was an official-looking letter, printed in Comic Sans, because of course it was. At the top, in bold underlined letters, it read, Notice of QMMUMNITWRE RE, suspicious activities and ongoing violations at 318 Maple Drive. President, Neighborhood Safety and Compliance Authority, Karen Whittaker. Beneath the header was a list of accusations that looked like they were copy-pasted from a bad police procedural show. Unlicensed lawn art displays. C. Flamingo Incident, Exhibit B. Suspicious trunk-related activities. C. Halloween Incident, Exhibit C. Hostile attitude toward community standards officer. C. Multiple interactions, Exhibits D through F. Possible underground tunnel system. C. Karen's personal observations, Exhibit G. Underground tunnel system. I couldn't even finish reading before I started laughing so hard I spilled coffee on the page. The letter ended with, Mandatory attendance required. Location, HOA Meeting Hall, HOA Karen's garage. Date, Saturday, 6:00 p.m. Failure to appear may result in further escalation and potential referral to law enforcement. The whole thing had the legal way of a child's lemonade stand sign, but I wasn't about to miss this. If Karen wanted a trial, she was getting a circus. Preparing my defense and my entrance. The key to dealing with people like Karen is simple. If they go ridiculous, you go nuclear ridiculous. So I spent the next 2 days preparing. First, I created my own evidence binder, complete with color-coded tabs and a cover page that read, Evidence of Karen's reign of terror. Eggs AAZ. Inside were screenshots of her Facebook posts, blurry photos of her peeking through blinds, and transcriptions of her weird concerned citizen notes left on my door over the years. I even included a timeline titled, Chronology of Crazy, The Evolution of Karen's Obsession. Second, I bought a suit. Not a normal suit, but a full 3-piece tuxedo complete with tails and a bowtie. If I was going to be tried in her garage courtroom, I was doing it in style. Third, I hired my secret weapon, my cousin Jeremy, a part-time actor who specialized in community theater drama. Jeremy's job, to serve as my courtroom hype man, complete with a briefcase, sunglasses, and a fake law degree printed off the internet. The courtroom of chaos. At 5:55 p.m. on Saturday, I walked down the street with Jeremy beside me, both of us looking like we were heading to a red carpet event. Jeremy carried my evidence binder of doom, occasionally pausing to adjust his imaginary tie and mutter legal nonsense under his breath. Karen's garage had been transformed into her twisted vision of a courtroom. A folding table served as her judge's bench, with her lawn chair throne set behind it. A poster board behind her read, Community Review Hearing. Maple Drive Neighborhood Watch versus Andrew Marshall. Preserving the peace one violation at a time. About a dozen neighbors sat in mismatched lawn chairs, their faces a mix of amusement and curiosity. Karen's husband Rick slumped in the corner, looking like a man who had long ago made peace with his fate. Karen banged a wooden spoon against the table. This hearing will now come to order. Jeremy leaned over. Very professional, he whispered, adjusting his sunglasses. I bowed slightly. Your Honor, I said, grinning. Enough with the sarcasm. Karen snapped. This is serious business. Of course, I said. Please proceed. She launched into a 10-minute monologue, detailing my alleged crimes with the passion of a prosecutor aiming for life without parole. She cited her observations, her feelings, and even a gut instinct honed by years of community vigilance. At one point, she produced a crudely drawn map showing how she believed I'd constructed a network of underground tunnels to smuggle contraband. What kind of contraband was never specified. Jeremy stood, dramatically adjusting his jacket. Objection. Karen's eyes bulged. What do you mean, objection? Jeremy held up a laminated sheet that said, I object in Comic Sans. My client demands proof. Not speculation, not imagination. Proof. Karen's face flushed. I have photos. She produced a stack of blurry, zoomed-in pictures, most of which showed me standing in my own driveway, occasionally scratching my head or talking on the phone. Exhibit A, she declared. Suspicious loitering. Objection, Jeremy said, not even looking up. That's called standing. Exhibit B, she continued, holding up a picture of my flamingo army, all arranged in an arrow pointing at her house. Jeremy leaned over to me. That's art, he whispered. Modern art. Karen's frustration built with each objection. By the time she reached Exhibit G, a photo of me carrying groceries, Jeremy simply held up his laminated I object sign without speaking. The witnesses and the twist. Karen, determined to recover her momentum, called her first witness herself. She took the stand, an upside-down milk crate, and testified about my odd schedules, my suspicious packages, and my general aura of criminal mischief. Every time Jeremy objected, she just shouted, overruled, despite having no actual authority to overrule anything. Next, she called Mr. Patel, the elderly neighbor who barely spoke English and nodded at everything. When asked if he found me suspicious, he gave a long speech in Hindi that, according to his daughter, was mostly about the rising cost of milk. Jeremy stood. We moved to dismiss all witness testimony as irrelevant, non-probative, and completely bonkers. Karen glared. Denied. The defense strikes back. When it was my turn, Jeremy wheeled out the evidence binder of doom and began his theatrical defense. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, pacing dramatically, what we have here is not a dangerous man, but a victim. A victim of unchecked paranoia, power hunger, and an addiction to laminated clipboards. He flipped open the binder to Exhibit A. Karen's Facebook posts, each one progressively more unhinged, accusing me of everything from illegal gardening techniques to suspiciously fast package retrieval. Next, he presented a timeline, a laser pointer tracing each incident back to Karen's original obsession, the day I parked my car slightly over the property line 4 years ago. She never forgave him, Jeremy said solemnly. Justice demands that we recognize this entire hearing for what it is, a personal vendetta dressed up as community concern. The neighbors murmured. Mrs. Delgado, the HOA president, cleared her throat. Karen, is this true? Karen sputtered. I'm just protecting the neighborhood. Jeremy held up the final piece of evidence, a log of Karen's 911 calls over the past year. They ranged from suspicious Amazon boxes to man-watering lawn at dusk. The room erupted in laughter. The verdict. After an hour of bickering, Mrs. Delgado stood. "I think we've heard enough." Karen shot to her feet. "But..." "No," Mrs. Delgado said firmly. "This is ridiculous. Andrew's not on trial." "You are." The crowd gasped. Karen's jaw dropped. "Me? Enough with the false reports. Enough with the surveillance. Enough with whatever this was." She gestured around the garage. "But I..." "No buts," Mrs. Delgado said. "You're hereby banned from filing any more complaints without actual evidence." The neighbors burst into applause. Jeremy and I high-fived. Karen turned so red I thought she might explode. As the crowd filed out, Jeremy leaned over to me. "Justice is served, and for the first time in years, peace returned to Maple Drive. For now." The resurrection of Karen, HOA's most wanted. The sun had barely risen the day after the community review hearing, and for the first time in a long time, I woke up feeling victorious. Karen had been publicly humiliated. Her self-appointed authority had been stripped. Her laminated clipboards, once symbols of her self-righteous tyranny, were now nothing more than over-glorified office supplies. I thought I had won. That was my first mistake. The quiet before the storm. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, breathing in the crisp air of Karen-free serenity, and admired my lawn. My flamingo army stood proudly in formation, a cheerful, plastic reminder of my petty triumph. The neighborhood was calm. Birds chirped. No suspicious walkie-talkie noises echoed across the street. It felt too good to be true. It was. Because by noon, my mailbox was zip-tied shut. Not taped. Not glued. Zip-tied, with at least 10 industrial-strength black ties crisscrossing the metal like it was a top-secret government file cabinet. Hanging from the mailbox post was a laminated sign. Of course it was laminated. That read, "Notice of mail violation. Temporary losiki deun for TOMUNIT we safety or evayu." I stood there, blinking in disbelief. She'd lost the hearing. She was officially banned from issuing complaints. Yet here we were. "Karen," I shouted across the street. Her curtains twitched, but no response. "Karen, I know this was you." Still nothing. Just silence and a faint rustle from inside her house, like someone hurriedly flipping through the HOA Dictator's Handbook. I was halfway to my tool shed to retrieve some bolt cutters when I noticed something weirder. A camera. Not hers. A drone camera, hovering just above my property, blinking red like it was recording. It was small, cheap, probably bought off the clearance rack at Best Buy. But the message was clear. Karen was upgrading her surveillance game. The petty Cold War had gone aerial. The return of Neighborhood Watch 2.0. By evening, the first anonymous flyer appeared. Taped to my front door was a letter, printed in Comic Sans, Karen's telltale signature font choice, with a dramatic title. Maple Drive Security we Bulletin. Beware the dangers among us. It read, "Attention residents. Due to recent suspicious activity and the lack of proper enforcement from our weak and compromised HOA, the community must take action to protect itself. We, the concerned citizens of Maple Drive, are organizing an independent safety initiative, ISI, to restore peace, order, and compliance. To ensure all residents adhere to appropriate neighborhood standards, active patrols will begin immediately. Any unusual behavior, property violations, or suspicious deliveries will be documented and forwarded to local authorities. Your cooperation is expected." Signed, a concerned resident. Totally not Karen. It was so painfully obvious who wrote it, but the truly insane part was the logo. Right under the text, printed in faded grayscale, was a fake badge, a star-shaped monstrosity with the words, "Neighborhood Safety Patrol, Division of Concerned Citizens, Unofficial." The woman had created her own secret police. Karen's Night Watch. By the following night, Karen's personal patrol had launched. It started small. Karen herself, walking up and down the block in her neon safety vest, clipboard in hand, fake badge dangling from a lanyard around her neck. She held a walkie-talkie, though I strongly suspected the only person on the other end was her husband, Rick, watching TV and muttering, "Uh-huh," every 10 minutes. But then, she recruited a small handful of fellow busybodies, the PTA mom from down the street, old man Cooper who hadn't left his porch in 5 years, and somehow Karen's yoga instructor started walking with her, decked out in matching reflective vests and carrying flashlights way too bright for suburban sidewalks. They patrolled in shifts 3 times a day, morning, dusk, and a late-night curfew sweep where they walked the block, muttering into their radios like they were part of a low-budget SWAT team. They took pictures of everything. Trash cans left out 1 minute past collection. Documented. A car parked with its tires touching the grass. Photographed from 3 angles. A kid's bike left on a lawn. Immediate emergency summit. It was insane. And yet, the HOA did nothing. Because, technically, Karen wasn't filing complaints anymore. She'd found a loophole. Gather evidence now. Weaponize it later. The anonymous tip line. A week into Karen's new regime, I discovered the hotline. A glossy flyer appeared, taped to every mailbox on the street, with a bold header. Maple Derive tip line. Wari Piorti Cus Peseo ist activity einen only memo uzli. A local number was listed, along with a form to fill out for concerned citizens to report violations anonymously. The form asked for description of suspicious person / behavior, date and time of incident, potential ordinance violated, and just for flair, it ended with, remember, silence breeds danger. See something, say something. There was no doubt in my mind. Karen had created her own snitching infrastructure. That's when I decided it was time to go on offense. Operation Reverse Surveillance. 2 could play the surveillance game. I installed 4 cameras around my property, not subtle ones, big, obvious ones, complete with motion-activated floodlights. I added a new sign to my lawn, directly facing Karen's house. PROPERTY, unendear 24/7, CURVILANC, suspicious NID bars, will be documented, and reported. At first, she pretended not to notice, but the next time I stepped outside, she was on her porch, binoculars in hand, squinting at the cameras like they were alien technology. She even walked over, clipboard at the ready. These cameras violate visual harmony standards, she said, nose practically pressed against my mailbox. No, they don't, I said. The HOA rules allow cameras. She huffed. You don't need 4. Why do you need a drone? Her face twitched. That's for safety. So are these, I said, motioning at my glorious wall of lenses. We all want to feel safe, right? She walked away muttering something about intimidation tactics. I wasn't done. The incident that broke Karen. At 3 a.m. 2 nights later, my phone pinged with a motion alert. I pulled up the feed and there she was. Karen, crawling through my front yard like she was on a Navy SEAL mission, dressed in head-to-toe black, including a ski mask that didn't quite fit over her hair bun. She carried a tape measure and a notepad, crawling on her belly to get close enough to measure the distance between my garden gnome and the property line. The floodlights triggered, blasting the whole yard with lights so bright it could have been seen from space. Karen froze. For a moment, we locked eyes. Me through my camera feed, her from the ground like a raccoon caught raiding a trash bin. Then she bolted. She scrambled to her feet, tripping over a sprinkler, and sprinted back to her house, ski mask flapping behind her like the cape of the world's most pathetic supervillain. The next morning, I printed a glossy 8x10 screenshot of her mid-crawl and left it taped to her mailbox with a post-it note. Neighborhood watch. Caught on camera. Thanks for keeping us safe, Karen. She didn't leave her house for 2 days. But I knew this wasn't over. It was never over with Karen. The feud had evolved. This wasn't a petty HOA war anymore. This was suburban survival, Karen's final stand, and the day suburbia fought back. For 2 days after the Great Lawn Crawl incident, Karen's house sat eerily silent. The blinds stayed down. No laminated notes appeared. The orange safety vest that had become her second skin was nowhere to be seen. Neighbors whispered theories. Some said she was regrouping. Others suspected she'd been sedated by her long-suffering husband, Rick. One particularly optimistic neighbor hoped she'd finally seen the light and booked a one-way ticket to a remote monastery. I knew better. This was the calm before the Category 5 Karen storm, and it hit at exactly 5:30 a.m. on a Saturday. The declaration of all-out HOA war. It started with the sirens. Not police sirens. No, Karen had rented an actual emergency siren from somewhere, mounted it on a folding table in her front yard, and fired it up as the sun barely peeked over the horizon. The noise was so loud it rattled windows and set off at least 3 car alarms, including my own. I stumbled outside in my pajama pants, hair sticking up like a caffeinated porcupine, to find Karen standing at full attention in her driveway, now wearing a customized sash that read Neighborhood Defender General. Beside her stood a life-sized cardboard cutout of herself, because of course she had one, and a plastic file crate labeled Evidence of Community Collapse. Citizens of Maple Drive. She bellowed through a megaphone, her voice echoing off the houses like some demented Revolutionary War reenactor. The time has come to reclaim our community from the forces of disorder, chaos, and lawn flamingos. The Flamingo Army, still proudly arranged in my yard, stood like colorful plastic soldiers. One had a tiny pirate hat I'd added the night before, just to annoy her. We will no longer tolerate suspicious behaviors, nighttime disturbances, and blatant disrespect for community standards, she screeched. This is a citizen's takeover. I blinked at her. Are you staging a coup? Karen's eyes blazed with manic pride. A neighborhood revolution. We're creating a new HOA, the Maple Drive Emergency Compliance Authority. At this point, neighbors were gathering, coffee mugs in hand, bathrobes flapping in the breeze. Some were filming. Others just stood there, mouths hanging open in a mixture of awe and horror. From her garage, Karen's self-appointed patrol members emerged. The PTA mom, Old Man Cooper, and her yoga instructor, now decked out in matching homemade uniforms. Khaki shirts with MDECA ironed on the front, plus novelty sheriff badges they'd probably bought at a party store. Today we march, Karen shouted. We will document every violation, inspect every lawn, and ensure total compliance for the safety of all. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Is she drunk?" Compliance squad. Advance, Karen shouted, thrusting her clipboard into the air like it was Excalibur. The squad shuffled down the street, each carrying a clipboard and a roll of caution tape. Their first stop, my house. The siege of 318 Maple Drive. They marched right up to my lawn, stopping only when they reached the edge of my motion-activated sprinkler system, which I had rigged specifically for this moment. The moment Karen set foot on my grass, the sprinklers roared to life, drenching her and her clipboard army in cold water. The yoga instructor shrieked. Mr. Cooper's toupee slid sideways, and Karen stood there, sopping wet, mascara streaking down her cheeks, clipboard held aloft like a drowning survivor clutching the life preserver. "This is an act of war," she screamed. "Just watering my lawn," I said, grinning. The gathered crowd, which had swelled to nearly half the neighborhood by this point, erupted in laughter. Karen stumbled back, dripping, but her madness wasn't dampened. "I demand immediate access to inspect your property." "No," I said, wiping a bit of coffee off my chin. "In fact, Karen, I think we've all had enough." The crowd murmured in agreement. It was then that Mrs. Delgado, The actual HOA president stepped forward. The final verdict. Mrs. Delgado was holding a clipboard of her own. An official HOA complaint file, one with Karen's name on the top. Karen, Mrs. Delgado said, her voice sharp with the authority of someone who had reached the absolute end of her patience. We need to talk. Karen froze. I'm protecting the neighborhood. No, Mrs. Delgado said. You're harassing your neighbors, filing false complaints, holding illegal hearings, and now you're staging. What a coup. A compliance revolution, Karen shouted, but her voice wobbled. Mrs. Delgado flipped through the file. In the last 18 months, you've filed 47 complaints, not a single one upheld. You've called the police 14 times for non-crimes, including, she held up one sheet, reporting a suspicious squirrel that turned out to be a squirrel. Karen's wet hair clung to her face. This is a witch hunt. No, Karen, Mrs. Delgado said firmly. This is enough. The crowd murmured in agreement. Effective immediately, Mrs. Delgado said, you are barred from all neighborhood watch activities, forbidden from holding any self-appointed positions, and prohibited from contacting the HOA directly for 6 months. Any further infractions will result in a formal vote to remove you from the community. Karen gasped, clutching her laminated badge like it could save her. You can't. I was protecting us. No, Mrs. Delgado said. You were terrorizing us. Karen's lips quivered. But Karen, I cut in, unable to resist. You lost. It's over. She turned, wild-eyed, like a cornered animal. You did this. You turned them all against me. I raised my coffee mug. And I'd do it again. The crowd cheered. For a moment, Karen stood there, rain-soaked, defeated, her kingdom crumbling beneath her sensible shoes. Then she let out a long, shaky breath and did the only thing left for her to do. She grabbed her clipboard, her dignity, and her sopping wet army, and marched back to her house. The front door slammed, the blinds snapped shut, and the era of Karen the neighborhood tyrant officially came to an end. Or so we thought. Epilogue. Suburbia's happily ever after. For weeks, Maple Drive basked in the afterglow of Karen's exile. The flamingos remained, neighbors threw Karen-free barbecues, and the air seemed just a little lighter without the ever-present threat of a clipboard citation hanging over our heads. Even Rick, her long-suffering husband, seemed liberated, spotted grilling outside for the first time in years, beer in hand, smile on his face. But Karen, she was still there, peeking through the blinds, plotting, waiting. Her thirst for suburban domination would never fully die. But for now, the neighborhood was united, stronger than ever, and every time I walked past her house, I gave a little wave to those twitching blinds. Because in this neighborhood war, I had won. For now.